Good morning. Just checking. It is good to see everyone here this morning. I know hopefully a couple more will kind of trickle in here. I know we have some online that are watching this morning as well, and so we're grateful to have them with us. And we're going to be looking at chapter 4 of Joshua as we go through this book and looking at the Israelites' entrance into Canaan. Chapter 4 starts to really get interesting with their whole the entrance and everything, because there are things that happen that are so significant with the Israelite people and things that we remember about it today. And I want to ask a question first at the top of this as we get into it. What are some of the, we ended last week looking at some of the secular memorials and things that we remember, around the country, around the world. There are memorials that we see, in Washington, D.C. We see, see the Lincoln Memorial, and we see Arlington. We see the wall, with all the soldiers on it, which can get really emotional. And I've never been there. I know many who have, and if you've been there, you know really how emotional that can get. But because it is a memorial. What is, when you look at things like this, what's a memorial, though? First off, when we start talking about stuff like this, so we can get a firm handle on it. It's a place to remember something, isn't it? It is an item that you see or something physical that you do or interact with to remember a certain event. And it certainly draws our mind to these different things. The 9/11 Memorial, the Oklahoma City Memorial, and where you remember all the people that were there and what they did and the certain events that were surrounding. I want to move that into more of the biblical realm, though. What are some of because the Bible talks about certain memorials that have been in place for years and years. What are some of the memorials that we have, other than the stones in Joshua 4, because we're going to get to that in just a minute. But what are some of the memorials that we see in the Bible? The rainbow is a great one. Well, what does that commemorate? God will never destroy the earth by water again. And it's just, and when you see that rainbow, you're able to remember. Now, I know some have taken it to, where it shouldn't be today, but when you do see that rainbow for a Christian, it means something, doesn't it? That God, there was something that happened that would orchestrate that rainbow. And, remember, they've never, before then, no one had ever seen a rainbow before, because there had never been rain before that. And, and every time now that we see rain and we see that rainbow, so many of us are drawn back to remember that. It was an event, and a global event at that would take place. So that's a good one. What else? What's another memorial we see in the Bible?
Pyramid.
The what?
Pyramid.
Go ahead, expand on that if you could.
The memorial of those kings that you're
Okay. We see the kings and certain things that are in place that remind us of, different civilizations and cultures and so forth. That's a good one. Anything else? Anything else? Every first day of the week, isn't it? We take part in a memorial. And it's to remind us of a significant, probably the most significant event that we've ever seen. And remember when Christ sat down with his apostles one final time to eat, for that, to get them to remember what was about to take place. He said, eat and take what would be his body? The bread. And his blood? Fruit of the vine. And those are memorials, aren't they? Every time that we see that on a Sunday morning, our minds are drawn to, now we weren't there, and I can't imagine the emotional impact that must have made at that point, but nonetheless, we are greatly affected by that, aren't we? We remember that there was someone named Jesus that went to the cross because of us, and that is what he wanted to, out of anything that could have been left behind. Because a lot of the memorials that we see are things that are built, aren't they? They're built and they stay there, and over time they can deteriorate. They can Some stay, but this is something that that we interact with, that we actually participate in. We watch, we can watch a rainbow. Really can't get interactive with a rainbow, but we watch a rainbow. We see we see the pyramids. But with the Lord's Supper, that's something that we see and we actually take part in, and we can say, this is what Christ wanted us to remember. This is why he wanted us to remember it. And so when you see that bread, that means something, doesn't it? When you see that, you read about the blood that was shed, but that is a memorial for us. What else besides the Lord's Supper? What about the Passover? Remember the Passover? We see that, while we might not take part the way the Jews did, but that Passover was very significant, wasn't it? Going all the way back to Egypt and helping them remember what God did for them and what God even does sometimes, to this day for those who still keep it. You've got the feast days that you read about in the Old Testament. That was a memorial for them. They remember that every time that feast day, on top of it being a command for them to take part in, just as we are to take part in the Lord's Supper, they would take part in these feast days that would commemorate certain things. What about the Ark of the Covenant? Because that was, remember last week, and this is how we're going to use this as a segue into today's lesson. Remember they had to picked up the Ark of the Covenant, the Levites, couldn't be anyone else, and they went, when they started going across the Jordan, there were things that were in that ark, and we've talked about this before. What was in the ark? 3 different items. The rod. Okay, what was the rod? Because the rod is you look at that, and that is in and of itself a memorial for something, isn't it? That rod, what was the rod? What was so important about that? Part of the Red Sea. There was nothing else significant about that rod except that it parted that sea. And there were miracles that were tied to that rod, wasn't there? What else was in there? Manna. Well, what was so important about manna?
It was the food that was provided to them in the wilderness.
Okay, food that was provided. And, you think that was the only food that was provided at points, right? Wasn't it? That God rained down this manna, and this manna stayed for them, and it sustained them through the whole wilderness journey. There was nothing special, other than what that was. It was just, it was food. But there was a significant meaning behind that. There's a connotation with that manna that, that made them remember, hey, this is what God did. He provided for us. And you look at that rod, and it was a signal to the Jews or a reminder of the Jews that God got us out of one of the most dire situations they could have been in. And they were in that for hundreds of years. What was the last one? The law. What was so important about the law? That's an easy one, isn't it? That's what they were to keep. That was the commands for them to keep. And so anytime they looked at that law, they knew this is what God has for us. That was to have the law in its physical form like that, being written down, being carried with them, they're able to look at that and remember this is how we're going to get closer to God. And so, these 3 things in and of itself was, it was a memorial for what God was doing for them. And then you have on the ark itself, the mercy seat. What was so important about the mercy seat? Well, that's where God said he would dwell. He says, as long as you have this, I'm going to be with you. So we've got all these different memorials in Scripture that really was significant to the people at that time. And that's what brings us to Joshua chapter 4. I want to read just a couple of verses before we get to chapter 4, just to kind of catch us up to this. Chapter 3, beginning in about verse 14 to the end of the chapter. Because we see that, this is where they start to go over, finally, after all these years, finally start going over the sea. So it was when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan. And the camp, as you can see right here, by the way, we're going to be looking at this in chapter 3 and 4. Abel Shittim is right around in this area, and they're going to be crossing the Jordan up to about Gilgal. Now, Gilgal, it's interesting because you notice it has a question mark right there. A lot of these different cities are kind of speculation today, or they have to make kind of guesswork of it because they didn't know the definitive spot where that, those cities were. A lot of times what would happen is the cities would move. And in fact, there's, when you look at Jordan or Jericho, and Jericho's, you see how close that is to Gilgal. Well, Jericho would end up, and I'll mention this again when we get to it, but Jericho was a city that was moved several different times. There wasn't just one set spot for Jericho. We read about Jericho in the New Testament. Christ talks about Jericho. And so sometimes these cities, when they would either be defeated or they would move and things would dry up, they would kind of move. But this is where, this is the approximation of where Gilgal would have been. And so you see how from Abel Shittim all the way to Gilgal, crossing that Jordan River, right in the middle, by the way, not in a marshy area. It was right in the middle of the deepest part of this, and it was flood season, as was mentioned last week. And so that was significant. And so it says, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan with the priest bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as those who bore the Ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the Ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaretan. And so the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. And then the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over, on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. So you think of just thousands upon thousands of people being, remember how far away the Ark had to be, or the people had to be from the Ark? How far was it? About 3/4 of a mile. I looked this morning, and it was anywhere from a half to about 3/4 of a mile, give or take, 2,000 cubits. And and the description of a cubit is about from the tip of your finger to the elbow. Now, some people obviously have a longer forearm than others, and so it might vary a little bit, but that's about how far the people had to be from that ark. So you imagine thousands of people waiting for that ark to go into the Jordan. The Jordan dries up. And by the way, do you think it was significant? Out of any time of the year, of any time that God could have crossed, had them cross over the Jordan River, isn't it interesting that he did that at the most flooded time of the Jordan's, of the Jordan all year long? He didn't do it when the floodwaters were down. He didn't do it, or when the water was down. He didn't do it in drought season. He didn't do it any time. He made sure that they were, now, I might be reading into more of this than there is, but I really think it's interesting that the timing of this Jordan, of when God had them cross over. Because think of how much more significant it would be when the waters would be even raised that much higher, and to have them dry up for thousands of these Israelites to go across, and then the priests who were carrying the ark would go the rest of the way. And that brings us into chapter 4.
Just an idea. I don't know. For the same idea, people used to burn their ships whenever they got to a new land. They left just water behind them, and they had faith that they only had forward to go to. So as soon as the floodwaters came back, they knew they were totally committed to doing the work of the Lord, maybe.
There was no turning back at that point, was there? I mean, that's just, and that had to be a confidence builder. To see those waters, dry up the way that they did. Now, many of these people saw what happened at the Red Sea. And now to see the Jordan, the same thing happened with the Jordan, really had to, any doubt that was in their minds before, or any trepidation before, must have been behind them. I mean, now you know what God's capable of doing. And God is just opening up this way. And he always did. He's opening up a path right into Canaan. And he told them long before this, he says, look, there's going to be the Perizzites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and all of these different warring people And he's literally opening up a path all the way through a river that is deeper than we can imagine, and having thousands of them being able to cross this with nothing to stand in their way until they get to Jericho. And so they cross the water, and that's where the memorial comes into play when you look at chapter 4 and beginning in verse 1. Now, there's, as we read through chapter 4, you'll notice there's two different sets of stones that are going to be placed. In verse 1 says, it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, and so everyone has already gone over, the Lord spoke to Joshua saying, I want you to take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe. How many do you think were in every tribe? Quite a lot, right? So imagine the honor that must have been bestowed upon the one who was chosen to do this. We get flattered when we're chosen for significant things, aren't we? I mean, imagine, what that, they weren't named, but imagine just the honor it must have been to help with something like this, to see. And so he said, one man from every tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan. And by the way, a stone is not a little rock. These were stones. From the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm, and you shall carry them over with you, and you shall leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. And then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder. So Joshua's carrying out what God wanted to have done, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? And then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed over the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever. So here's a memorial for this amazing accomplishment for God. This is, some build statues, don't they? Some build, did they have time right here to build a statue or something that looked creative? They didn't have the time to do that, did they? But God wanted this event remembered. He wanted this event to be so big and so valuable to them and so relevant to them that, that these stones, and so, these aren't just rocks that they're going to throw up onto the bank. He says, I want you to take them from the midst of the Jordan, and, with the size of them, I have no idea, but he wanted these men to carry these stones into the place where they would dwell, and that would be Gilgal, and set them down. And so I imagine it was in a, when you see pictures of this, a lot of them you'll see like in a circle, and and that's the artist's rendition of it. And what the pattern was, I don't know.
How did they build an altar to the Lord? I remember them having to take uncut stones to build an altar. So I'm wondering, do you think there might be a relationship there?
Possibly. They could get an altar built, I imagine, pretty quickly with the rocks, with stacking them. And I mean, they were experienced with that. And, or was someone with me, I need instructions to build stuff like that. But I need instructions for a fire pit sometimes. But they knew how to do it. And so, yeah, they were to build that altar as well. But he appoints these men. And it just, in fact, in the King James Version, it says he prepared, or they were men that were prepared, men that were appointed. But if we need to be ready and prepared for anything that comes our way, for anything that we do. And what a great lesson this is, that, to remind us of that. But then they say, what do these stones mean? What mean these stones? And what's the answer? We just read it. What do the stones mean?
It represented
That was it. He wanted them to understand and remember that this was, that it was God helping them to do this. They, not one moment through this entire thing was because of them. Now, they had to follow what God commanded. Yes, there was something that they did, but could they have gotten this far without him? And that's why he says, this is what I want you to do. Set these stones up so that the children, when the children will ask, this is what, this is the account that's going to be told of them. And so they set these rocks up in a certain pattern or a certain way so that people, they had to do it in a way that people would ask in the future, wouldn't they? They had to do it in a way that would probably draw attention to them. Well, what are these stones and what do these stones mean? And so I imagine that it was, was interesting. And so they're set up as this reminder, the memorial for everyone to see. Now, here's what we need to remember as well, is to be careful when we get to places like this, because when you look on the internet, and I've seen probably 2 or 3 different places where I saw stone formation looking at this online. And this is why I didn't include any pictures of it, because I don't want to give us kind of a false speculation about it. You need to be really careful when you talk about findings like this, because people really get into the fantasy of finding Bible artifacts, don't they? They are so into finding, they want to, we love when something can be authenticated. I mean, you look at, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, you look at the Cyrus Cylinder, you look at, things that we know that have been authenticated that really do validate certain events in the Bible. But you need to be careful with that too. Because so many people, when you see these documentaries on TV, folks, be really careful with those. Because you know why they're putting these out? Because there are people that are watching them, and their popularity grows, and they're making a lot of money off of all of these things that have not been proven, and people just flock to it. People go over to the Holy Lands because they say, because they're actually tours, and that's a big thing. When you go over there, there's all these tours to see these different places, and I've talked to people that said, I went in the very part of the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized, and that's where I was baptized, and that's where it gets, and so they think their baptism is more significant than any other baptism that could take place, because they were right in the spot that Jesus was in the Jordan River. Well, they don't know that. And why would the Jordan River be any more significant with water? Apparently that's more, was it any more significant than, than the fountains there, where the 3,000 on Pentecost were baptized?
Naaman didn't think so.
Well, but Naaman, there was a command for him specifically.
But that water he was baptized in went on down the river.
Yeah. So it didn't stop, did it? But we need to, be really careful though when you look at stuff like this, because I've seen 2 or 3 different spots where they say, oh, these are the stones. And there was one spot where all the stones were in a big circle, and that's probably where you're going to see most of it, when you see a picture of it. There are other spots another spot where the stones were not quite in that circle. They look, but they were obviously different stones. And they say, no, this was the spot over here. And we just don't know. I see people get really caught up with like Noah's Ark. They discovered the Ark, and it turns out to be a fabrication. But you know what? Makes good TV, doesn't it? People watch these documentaries. Be careful and make sure, to investigate. I mean, look at the authenticity of it, because just because it's on TV and just because it's on the internet, does it mean it's true? No, there are acid tests that they go through years before determining whether or not something is, in fact, true. And so, we really do a kind of a disservice to try to show people, because a lot of us, with good intentions, try to show people these different things and say, see, this proves the Bible. I remember hearing something, Ashley, did you say?
Well, it's like, yeah, it's cool history, but is it necessary for salvation?
Right, that's part of it. We don't need any artifact for to know about salvation anyway, right? I mean, it helps when some of it, can validate. I mean, I think the Dead Sea Scrolls are probably the most significant find that they've ever found to really validate things. But I heard someone say, well, I remember reading this a couple of years ago. You may have read the same thing, that they found all of these chariots in the bottom of the Red Sea. And this must have been the chariots that, followed all the Israelites across, and it ended up being a fake story. But they do that because it sells. So I don't know what the stones look like. I don't know the pattern. I don't know the shapes. I don't know the sizes. But what we do know is what God gave to us, and that is that they took stones out of the Jordan River and put it where they would camp, and that would be at Gilgal on the other side of the river. And it was because, exactly like Jerry said, which is what Scripture says, it is to remind us, because people are going to ask about these things. They're going to be interested in these things. And we need to know, and it needs to be able to have something tied to it.
Those rocks could probably be distinguished by they will be round and smooth from being in the water rushing over it, where the others on the shore will probably be broken and jagged and stuff like that.
Possibly. I mean, that's, it makes as much sense as any with the shape.
Another history question, and that is, and they are there to this day.
Ah,
So when was this written that we could say at this point in time it was still there?
That's it. And that's, we need to remember that too, because a lot of people will read this and they say, oh, see, it's here to this day. But this wasn't written last week. Maybe if it was written last week and it's here to this day, then we have something to talk about. But at the time this was written, they said, yes, it was here even to this day. I was actually asking an archaeology friend of mine that has gone on a number of digs over there, if they are still there. And his answer was the same as, just, you got to be careful because the tours will tell you they are. You go on a tour over there and they'll show you right where they are. And, there's these stones that probably were put there a couple of years ago. But, and they look good. It probably does remind you to some extent, just being in the same vicinity, what it might have looked like or resemble. But, you think over time and that the winds and the waters and everything like that, it's possible that it might not. But they did want them to be put down so that people for years would be able to look at those and remember what was put down for it. What mean these stones? To remember what God could do. He parted the water for the ark. And it was nothing more than a reminder for them. But then there's a second set of stones. And we see this beginning in verse 9. And then Joshua, after all these stones were placed where they lodged and laid them down there, it says, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So it's the ones in the midst that were there to this day. Now, I want to pause right there. Why do you think they set these stones up in the midst of the water? They had them set up on the other side, and it was obviously, there was a description of why those were there. That made sense. And I'm asking you, because I have questioned this for several years. Why in the midst of the water? Why in the middle of the Jordan? Could anybody see it? I mean, those waters came rushing back after after everyone crossed over. There's no way they'd be able to see those stones. Why? Why do you think those stones were put in the middle of another set of stones in the middle of the Jordan, and then have it all covered with water?
Going back to my altar comment for the first one, and that is, that there is a geographic aspect to all this,
Okay.
and it is the Lord is going in to take his land back from basically the sins, the gods of the land. And so every place where they go, they set up, they had their high places, but the Lord God Almighty had his places too. And in his places, everywhere they went, they set up saying, this is now the Lord's land. This is consecrated to the Lord. Same as in, the reason I was asking the question about the other pile of stones being more of an altar than a maybe it was anything else, as a memorial that this is the first area of dry land that the Lord has taken back from the armies of sin that have taken us over, and they're about ready to clean sin out of the land.
Okay, so it's more of a geographic thing of saying this is where it happened.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else?
Well, I think the safest thing to say would be, because that's what they were told to do.
They were told,
commanded to do.
right?
Irregardless of what we may think was done there, the main point is that that's what they were told to do.
God said, I want you to do this, and that's good enough for me, right?
Well, in that case, it was Joshua who did it, right? It was Joshua, but Naaman, again, going back to Naaman, that colors a lot of, he took dirt back to where he came from.
Right.
So, and the idea was that this dirt was holy dirt because it came from a place that the Lord had consecrated because he had been there. And it's the geographic mindset where there's supposed to be a light to the entire world there.
Okay.
There's supposed to be.
So it was commanded, holy dirt.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk, with Naaman. I mean, because the Jordan River, obviously, there were a lot of things that happened in the Jordan River. That was a big river that a lot of events took place that we read about in the Bible. And, when you look at Naaman, and of course, Naaman's the one that was told, he gets leprosy, and he's told, look, you dip in the Jordan how many times? 7 times. And you're going to be okay. Would 5 times suffice? Can you imagine dipping in a place like the Jordan? How clean was the Jordan River, by the way?
Naaman thought it was dirtier than where he came
It was, it was really dirty. Of course, Naaman was probably used to all the great waters because he was high up. But he looked at the Jordan as just a filthy body of water. And it probably is what it is. You look at any river. You look at, the Sacramento or the American River. How clean is that? Jim and I have been out there a lot together on that, and I can't see the bottom of it. I probably don't want to see the bottom of it and what's down there, but
There's airplanes and stuff. That was in the newspaper today.
oh, so there's an airplane down there now. Okay, well, you can add one more. But that is, rivers are not known to be, especially rivers of that size, are not known to be the cleanest river. So when Naaman goes down into there and God said, okay, I want you to dip 7 times, was there any significance to the Jordan River being the river for Naaman? Was there any significance for the Jordan River being the river for Christ to be baptized in it? No, it was a body of water. That just happened to be there, right? It's geographically being the place. It was probably the most, it would have been the closest place likely. It was, and God just said, this is what I want you to do, though, Naaman. I want you to dip in that 7 times.
One more thing, it just dawned on me here. God tells people to do stuff, and then people do things based on their particular view of what they think God means. Dagon, remember whenever the ark was taken and the Dagon thing fell over?
Right.
From then on, no one stepped. They stepped over that threshold because that was God's land. He proved with the ark, and in their minds, it was, I'm trying to think, sacred geography or something like that. It was just, in their minds, you have a holy place. We still have the thing today, the finger of God touched there, or this is a holy land, or this is a holy...
Right. Now we got to be careful with stuff like that, though, too, because I think people sometimes make it more than what it is, and we can almost idolize it, and it can become an idol.
Maybe that is the lesson. So God, we have clear things here where God said do one thing, and Joshua also, do you see any instructions from God here on how he instructed Joshua to do something on his own and set it up in the middle of
Right.
the Jordan?
Which is interesting because, kind of goes with what Jim says is that, did we see Joshua here question why? God said for the first set of stones, I want you to take these up to where you'll be camping, which would be Gilgal, and I want you to put these stones there, and here's why I want you to put these stones here. Because people are going to ask about them, and here's what I want you to tell them. Because God, there is a significant thing that happened, and I want people for years to come to remember what happened here. And that was big because this is the biggest journey of their lives. They're going into Canaan, the promised land. This is what has been prophesied. This is the thing that they were supposed to do 40 years prior to this. And they're finally there. And he's saying, this is what makes it. And then, It's still when the river is parted like this and on dry ground, he says, all right, now Joshua, I want you to go in and I want you to put stones in the middle of the river. You didn't tell him why, did he? Joshua didn't question that either. He didn't say, well, why, God? I mean, we have these stones up here. Why, why here? And these aren't even going to be seen. It's interesting to me, why he put him there. And as a human, I just, I ask why. I mean, I know, and I get it. God told him, and why, why is a relevant question here, but we still ask it.
So my question is it important or is it just being recorded because that's what he did? And that's what he was told?
Well, it was obviously important for him to do, or else he wouldn't have done it,
But
but
it's important
for us to know. Probably not, but we ask anyway, right?
Right, because, I mean, the other stones, the one they put where people were obviously going to see them.
Right.
That's important because that's a memorial. People are going to see them and remember. These, no one's going to see them because they're in the river.
Right. So you're going to make me go home tonight and say, you know what, I'm not supposed to even know why, and just, it's not going to be supposed to be important to me, but I'm still going to wonder and scratch my head of why, these might be in the,
Maybe they're still there.
possibly.
Maybe we don't know yet because it hasn't happened. The reason why they're there.
Oh, what, the reason why? The answer hasn't been given to, well, at some point, I hopefully, maybe, but you're right. I mean, it's, ultimately, this is what God wanted him to do. He said, I want you to put these in the middle.
The one thing that occurs to me is that the ones in the middle of the river won't be able to be touched by anybody because they couldn't get access to it. That's a very dangerous river.
Yeah, but it can't be memorialized because we can't see them. You don't know what's there unless you read and know it's there.
Right. The ones in the middle of the river, were obviously there for a reason. I mean, God had his reason, even though we don't. And was it a memorial? It likely, it was important to Joshua, I'm sure. It meant something to him. Joshua knew that, okay, God told me to put these stones in the middle of the river. There has to be some reason why I'm supposed to do this. And maybe it was just for him. Maybe it was between him. Because Joshua, you think of this time, Joshua had so much trust, so much faith in God, that they're going over exactly the way he did it. They grabbed those stones the way that they did it. They placed the ark in the middle the way that God said to do it. And now they're going over, and now they're going to see the waters wash behind him. And so, we see how the priests bore the arks. They stand in the middle while Joshua goes and he gets the, and gets the stones. When it came to pass, all the people had completely crossed over the ark of the Lord, and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people, and the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, armed before the children of Israel. So we've got these armed people for the Israelites, as Moses had spoken to them, and about 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. Remember what Rahab said, that there were people that, they struck fear into the people? Can you imagine 40,000 people armed for war just crossed over the Jordan, and they're right at your doorstep at Jericho. And on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. And then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched the dry land, what happened as soon as they were on the other side? Whoosh, right? And the water came back. And so, we have this great miracle. You can read to the end of that chapter right there. We'll get into chapter 5 next week. But you think of the stones and how significant they are. And then you kind of couple that with how, because the Lord uses stones in a couple of things. I know that was a 5-minute. I want to get a couple of prayer requests in this morning. Peter talks about being lively stones. And you think of what those stones represented, with the Lord being with them, and we're supposed to be lively stones. And you think the Lord is, is with us. It was a designation of true believers back then. what are lively stones that we're called to be today? Same thing. We are a designation of true believers. We're the only ones that are going to get, that are able to get people, to talk to people and connect them with the Bible. There's a lot of religions out there, but it's God's people that have that responsibility, who know the truth and who can, need to share the truth, and we need to explain to them what the Word of God is as well. We'll get into chapter 5 next week, and I appreciate everyone's attention.